We will go ahead and get started here. So this week, we are going to go through the live demo of the MSP calculator, kind of walk through how it works, how you configure it. It's pretty simple. It kind of has it looks a little intimidating at first, but it's actually very, very easy to use. And we recommend, if nothing else, taking a look at it and see if you can maybe even just validate your own pricing methodologies, how you end up with a price for a customer, and does it come close to what we calculate. And this MSP calculator does incorporate kind of all the things we've already talked about in the last few weeks. The concepts that we talked about are we're striving for an overall 50% gross margin. We want to strive for that gross margin after we pay for the outsource cost and we pay for a reasonable number of internal hours that we are going to spend servicing those customers. And it takes into consideration whether or not we're outsourcing, has the ability to add really any products that you might sell and give you a really nice, concise price point that incorporates all those margins, all those allocated hours, depending on number of PCs and servers, those items that we talked about over the last couple of weeks, and gives you a nice ballpark for it. I'll show that to you in a moment. First off, what I'll do is I want to just kind of show you where it is. We were passing it around as it's an Excel spreadsheet via email, but we had to have our pricing for WatchGuard on the website for WatchGuard firewalls and wireless access points. What we did is we just did a SharePoint shared document, so we're all using the most up-to-date version. It's actually under WatchGuard, but it is the full MSP calculator. One of the tabs on our MSP calculator is that WatchGuard pricing. So whenever anybody's looking at WatchGuard, we always point them to that, but it is our MSP calculator. If you go to Strategic Partners, and when you're on our homepage, go to Strategic Partners and scroll down to WatchGuard. For those of you that sell WatchGuard on the TAG program, this is where you typically go to place orders. So when you normally go to the WatchGuard partner page, it gives you some information about WatchGuard, obviously the typical contacts, some of the information about them, and what kind of partnership they have with TAG, like any of these tabs do. And then you see this TAG order form. On the order form is a link to the pricing, which is our MSP calculator. When you're on the order form, this link here, this blue one that says View Full Price List, what it's going to do is it's going to pull up in the SharePoint document that holds the pricing for WatchGuard. I'll blow this up a little bit here. This is the WatchGuard pricing, but if you look at the tabs below, this is actually just one tab in the full MSP calculator. When it opens here, you can obviously download it to your desktop or download it to send to any of your internal employees. But if you ever need the latest, greatest, the most updated, this document is updated in real time. So the most up-to-date version of the pricing calculator and also the various pricing components that we use within it for things like Continuum and WatchGuard and other strategic partners, those pricing items are always updated here. If you ever need make sure you have the latest version of this is where you would go. I'm going to use the Excel version of this. Everyone should be able to see that okay there. Okay. What I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through how this works. The primary tab is this MRR Quote Builder tab, and the rest of the tabs kind of support that. When you are in this, you're going to be putting in your various items. I'm going to take these out for now, and we'll kind of step through them. But it's going to look like this. It's just kind of a blank builder where you get to put in all the different items that you're going to have in your quote, the number of PCs, number of servers, are you supporting any of their other network devices, what other products are we selling for, let's say, BCDR? Do we want to add a WatchGuard firewall? Do we want to have other components, any additional items, even Azure pricing can be incorporated in here as well. And we'll walk through a nice example of this for you. But to kind of give you an overview of how this works, basically this is where you begin your quote, but the feeder tabs are the ones that you kind of need to know how these work. So why don't I walk through these other tabs first, and then we'll come back to this sheet to begin our example demo. The MRR Quote Builder is going to basically put this together, and what's going to happen is it's going to go down to the bottom here. It will come up with a quote number down at the bottom here, and it'll give you the quote in total dollars and the per user price. If you recall, we always ended up with, we talked about the per seat cost. We were always talking about kind of on not per PC and not per server, but the total package of everything we did. Remember how we said if we price things up properly, it should come to around $105 to $110 a seat before any BCDR or any other ancillary services are added. And we always went off of the total cost divided by the number of employees, so the per employee cost. So a $2,000 a month MSP package out the door with 20 employees, we are going to assume that that is a $100 per user idea. When we talk about per seat cost, that's what we mean. It's the total cost of your bundle per employee for covering the desktops, covering the servers, and then anything else we might add to it. Once we put all this in, it's going to give us a general price for the customer of what we would recommend pricing to make sure that we end up where? We end up at the 50% gross margins mark, which is what we've talked about for the last 2 weeks. We need to make sure we get there by pricing things properly, because we know what our cost is going to be for the outsourced products, and we have a pretty darn good idea of how many hours we need to build in for the time and effort that our internal technical resources will have to expend, and we need to get a 50% gross margin on those folks as well, and this will give us a fighting chance of doing that. Now, why do we want 50% gross margins? We go back to what we talked about the last 2 weeks is we see the best in the business, the better of your peers, doing MSP business and putting around 20 points to the bottom line. Where does that all start? The 50% gross margins, and we have a rough 15% budget for sales expenses for all your sales employees, the management of those employees, your advertising and marketing budgets, all that goes in under sales expenses. We have a budget of about 15%. So that gives us 50% gross margins less the 15% sales costs. So we should have a contribution of about 35 points. And then if we assume a reasonable overhead of 15% of sales, then we get to a 20% EBITDA bottom line. If you want to put 20 points to the bottom line, it kind of all starts with, can we deliver the services at a 50% gross margin? The sales costs are going to be what they're going to be. The overhead is going to be what it is. If we want to have a good shot at making that kind of profit, it all starts with being able to get that 50% gross margin. So this pricing calculator will be able to do that for you, kind of tell you where you would land. And people use this in a little different manner. You can use this any way you want. By saying that, what some folks have done is utilize this to come up with their pricing, and then they put that pricing into their quoting tool, and they utilize that quoting tool going forward the way they've always done. Others will basically do the methodology they've always done in order to price up a deal, and then they'll come here and run the same deal through this calculator and see if they come out somewhere close. And that way, if the pricing that this document generates is close to the place you would have gotten through your own method, then it just validates that you are arriving at the same place. You're just going about it a little different. That's the kind of the second way you can use it. You can use it to kind of validate that you're not underpricing your MSP bundle using whatever method you've always gone through. Then the third way is certain folks, take this and you can use this to price up deals. And then once you have a price, you put it into whatever proposal presentation for the customer you want. A lot of people use it a lot of different ways. So you can use this to quote deals. You can use this to come up with your pricing that goes into your quoting tool if you use a different one. Or you can use this just as a validation that, hey, we have a method and our method aligns with where TAG ends up. So it validates your pricing methodologies, even if maybe they're a little different in terms of how you go about it. If I come up with $2,000 a month and you come up with $2,000 a month, then we should be in the right place, however we got there. This will help us understand if we're pricing properly, whether we use it on a daily basis or not. Let's go to the next tab here. You see these tabs. There's down at the bottom, there's BDR. There's a costing sheet. There's a WatchGuard costing sheet, which is essentially the price list that we point everybody to for WatchGuard. And then there's a tab for partner services. And this is where you can add any other services that are not listed. Obviously, we do a lot of different services with a lot of different partners. We have most of the ones that are pretty standard for TAG members to use incorporated. But let's say you use a different BCDR solution, you use different products. That last tab I'll show you, you can add literally any product, any service to incorporate into this model as well. You're not limited to just what's listed here. It will accommodate pretty much any MSP proposal. The BDR solution, I'm going to look at that one first and kind of show you a little bit about this. You can basically select the Continuum backup solutions. They have the fixed cloud storage. They have the no cloud and pooled storage plan. They have backup pricing, and you kind of have to figure out what you need and ultimately configure this. These are not part of that $105 to $110 a seat when we say that kind of that's the ballpark where it ends up at. And the reason for that is BCDR solutions, depending on the need of the end user, can vary widely. There's no standard number that goes in there. If you have an architecture firm with a lot of CAD drawings and huge amounts of graphic data, they might need a heck of a lot more for their 10 employees than a 10-person real estate office, obviously. When you configure this, this is if you're using Continuum. In terms of questions on what and how you do this from a technical standpoint for a specific customer, we're not going to get into that today, but this is where you would put these items in. If you note that you have servers on the other side and you want to select the backup solutions in the cloud, you can do that here, and it will automatically populate the pricing. If you're not using Continuum, you can use whatever your backup solution is on the other tab where you can enter your own solution and your own pricing with whatever you are using. The next tab is the costing sheet. And this is a good one. I'm going to kind of start at the top here and just explain to you what is happening here. The Continuum costing is down below. The hourly billing is in these items here, and it's important for us to understand what we're doing here. These numbers don't need to be changed. Perhaps the bottom three can be, but the first one here is the burdened rate, which is your cost per employee. We set this at $70, assuming that if you have a $30 average billing rate, when you add up the cost of that person, plus the inevitable downtime, plus all the burden, plus the other folks in the department, such as dispatch, project management, operations manager, at the end of the day, all our data shows that it's going to, if you have an average $30 technician rate, the true cost of not just that employee, but the entire operations department for all the people that are going to be there, all the people, the labor load for all of the people that support operations is going to run you about $70 an hour. That is where we got our 140 when we talk about we need to realize $140 of realized labor rate. It's because we need to make 50% gross margins, and the cost of delivering an hour of labor statistically on average, now some people don't have a dispatcher, some people don't have the owner doing ops management. Obviously, you're going to have your own individual circumstances, but on average, if you look at all your technicians and you have some that are very expensive and you have some newer folks that are maybe less expensive, if the average of all those technicians is $30, the number we would recommend using for your loaded labor rate for delivering a single hour of labor is going to end up running you all in about $70 an hour. Now, when I've explained this in other webinars where I've just done little demos of this one-on-one, there's usually questions, well, I don't think it should be that much, or I think it should be more, or I calculate loaded labor rate differently. You know what, unless you have real hard data of what it costs you to deliver an entire hour of labor all in for your ops department, I would recommend using this number and it'll build in this 140 rate. I wouldn't change it unless you're absolutely sure. Now, The question for all of us is, what if your billing rate is more than $140 an hour? What if your billing rate when you bill by the hour is $160? If that's the case, I want you to build in as much as you can into this model. So I would recommend changing this. If your billing rate was 160, we're going to change this to 80. Now your cost may not actually be 80, but what this will do is this will make sure that for any hours that we build into our model, for estimated number of hours it's going to take to support this customer, it's going to bill it at your rate. So whatever your billing rate is, I would put in half of that dollar amount here if it's higher. If your billing rate is 140 or less, leave it. Just leave it. Because if you're only billing 110 or 120, you should be billing more anyway, and we don't want to underprice the bundle. If you have massively higher or lower costs for your technicians, if your average technician rate is $40-some or something crazy like that, then come see me, because this will need to be higher for you. Does that make sense when we look at this $70 rate and the $140 an hour that's going to get built into this pricing? Does that make sense? I want to stop there and make sure nobody's confused on that. So you see these tabs here. This is the hourly burden rate. And again, I wouldn't change this unless your actual billing rate when you bill by the hour is something higher than 140. These next items here, these are the amount of hours it's going to build into your quote based on the number of PCs and the number of servers. Again, you don't need to change these, but if you recall, when we talked 2 weeks ago about building an MSP bundle without using an outsource like a Continuum for help desk, if it was all done internally, how many hours did we have to estimate per PC? We estimated it was going to be a half hour per PC, correct? And that is this 0.5 hours. If we are doing an in-house server, it's this hour and a half right here. So the numbers we talked about last week and 2 weeks ago, they are in this calculator. It is going to say, okay, you're not using Continuum. We are going to estimate at $140 an hour that you are going to need an hour and a half per server and a half an hour per PC on average. If you are using Continuum, it's going to assume that conservatively, we can hope that it's better than this, but worst case, we hope that 2 out of 3 calls are going to get handled by that Continuum or that outsource help desk if you use a different service. If it's not Continuum, it should be doing the same. We ideally strive for 75–80% of calls should be handled by that help desk without getting escalated. So we're going to say conservatively, if we can just get 2 out of 3 performance, then what's going to happen is it's going to build in, instead of 30 minutes, it's going to build in just 10 minutes. And instead of an hour and a half per server, it's going to build in 30 minutes per server, assuming that 2/3 out of those calls is not going to get escalated. It's going to get handled by that help desk. So we're still going to build in 10 minutes per PC and 30 minutes per server for what? Well, we're not going to get 100% coverage. We are going to get some times when it's going to have a outsourced help desk is going to have to escalate back to us because they can't solve the problem, or it may be something that requires an on-site visit. Those things happen. So we are covering that time with this calculator. Look at the rest of these numbers here. Basically, we don't have true benchmarks for these, but if you look at network devices, web monitoring, security reporting, any of these other items, we've basically come up with very, very small hourly numbers to build into this, just because we know we are going to have to spend at least a little time from time to time, and that's not free either. So what this is going to do is any device that you're monitoring, it's going to incorporate a small amount of labor to manage and occasionally work on that device. If you're not using the Continuum RMM and you're not using the server support from Continuum, using another service, we can enter the same thing about the number of hours you might spend, but that's not going to be common. Typically, it's going to be a Continuum or it's going to be internal. So we have the ability to do that. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more and just kind of show you what's happening here. This pricing sheet has got all of the Continuum pricing. Now, we put kind of the most regular rack rate pricing here. Some of you might have due to your volume or due to some negotiation, maybe better pricing. If you have better pricing than this, we would recommend not putting that in here, because what that's going to do is that's going to lower the price that goes on your quote. So if you've got a little bit better pricing than this, we would recommend just leaving it, because it's still going to assume a full 2.0 margin gross up, so you can get 50% gross margins. And if you get a little extra from your having a little bit better pricing, then that kind of goes to you. You're not going to lower your price to the end user just because you were able to negotiate a slightly better price on Continuum services. We want you to still charge the regular rate. Now, you certainly can reduce your quote if you know you have some padding in the Continuum numbers. So if these prices don't match what you pay, we would recommend not changing them unless your price happens to be higher, and that shouldn't happen, but it should be there. Okay? We've got all kinds of these prices in here, and again, these are all changeable. The spreadsheet is protected, but you just have to go up to, unprotect sheet. There's no password. But it is protected so they don't get inadvertently changed, but you can change anything you want. You just have to unprotect the sheet. So we've got all the Continuum pricing, SD-WAN, some additional services from Solutions Granted, Panda, which is a security service that's now offered through WatchGuard. And then the last one I want to point out is Azure down here. If you are selling Windows Virtual Desktop or Microsoft Azure, you can put your per user cost into the model here, and you can change this to whatever you need it to be. However, you have to determine that this calculator doesn't have the ability to do these full configurations with Azure and Windows Virtual Desktop. Probably use either some service or some calculator or some workup. Nerdio has one. If you use Nerdio, it'll help you determine what this cost will be. So you have to use that outside calculator to figure out what the configuration is for the end user and how much it's going to cost. But once you figure that out through using Nerdio or some other type of production calculator, you'll just put that number in here, and it will include Azure in the final quote. I think that's pretty much it on this tab. Okay, next tab is WatchGuard. A lot of you have seen this if you sell WatchGuard. And what this is the standard price list for all of the firewalls, for basic and total security, firewalls, wireless access points, virtual firewalls. It's got all of this in here. The only thing you need to know on this is this monthly MSRP is what gets translated to the calculator. If I was to change, let's see, a T35 from $99 to $119, that's the price it's going to quote in your quoting tool. Now, the thing it doesn't do is this is a static sheet, so it actually doesn't change the margin that it's showing here. We may change that in the future. So just understand that whatever is in this monthly MSRP is what is going to translate as your WatchGuard pricing, and if you change it, it will change the pricing on the quote. Now, last tab before we get into our model or our demo is the additional services. We can actually add more to this, simply adding partner service 5, 6, 7. But this is where you add, what if you sell certain either products or services that are not listed? We all sell a lot of different things. I know a lot of people use Datto. Even Datto would be a good one here to put their services in here. And let's say this is for a specific partner or product, and let's say you have 2 or 3 different options that you use with the Datto backup services, and you can just put their cost in here. It'll have a place where you can actually select this and add it to your quote. You can have any number of services, and all you have to do is name the service and then put the various price points, and what it will do is it will automatically calculate a 50% gross margin within the price. And that price is also editable if you don't want to do a 2.0 for whatever reason. But from here, you put whatever other services you're selling and your cost, and it will calculate into the final product for you. And this is, again, if you see the note here, this is your pricing, not the customer pricing, because it's going to mark this up. So I'm going to go back to the quote builder now that we kind of understand what all these tabs do. So I typically use a kind of just a run-of-the-mill example of a 20-person company. Let's say this company's got 20 employees. Each one has their own desktop. They have 3 servers, a couple of Windows Active Directory servers. And I always put these in here because typically you're always going to have one or the few of these, but you have network devices of a router, switch, maybe a firewall, and wireless. So now I've got all the numbers of what I'm looking at here. Then all I'm going to do is I'm going to walk down how many services I'm going to sell them. So I'm going to start with the NOC and desktop support. This is where we would tell it what we're going to do for those 2 items. Now we might have internal, we might have nothing. Well, not nothing. We have internal or we'll have a continuum, and it'll populate the quote for us here. So I'm going to start with the servers. Let's say we go to servers, this outsource, Command Elite, that's the server support from Continuum. And I'm just going to change this to 1 so I can kind of show you what happens. If you look at this, I've got 1 server, it shows $83.50, and we're going to charge $167. The going rate for server management is $150 to $200 bucks. So this is actually about right. But look at the cost. Does the cost look wrong to anybody that uses Continuum? The cost from Continuum for a server support is not $83. So where are we getting this price? It's 48 bucks last I checked. Does anybody have an idea kind of why we're using this cost of $83? What we're doing is we are including in this $83 the labor that is outlined in row 28. So what's happening is if I say, hey, I'm going to have a server on Continuum, it's going to automatically build in down on line 27 is a half hour for additional technician services. Last I checked, a half hour at cost, $70 an hour loaded cost is going to be $35. So that's where you don't have to calculate how many hours to include. When you select using Continuum or not using Continuum, it's going to automatically assign the right number of hours based on our model. So you don't have to manually calculate it. If I have 1 server and I'm using Continuum, I'm going to build in a half an hour into my price. What if I'm not using Continuum? Let's say I'm going to do non-Continuum RMM and I'm going to build in 1 full hour. If I do that, then remember I said if we're not outsourcing, how many hours do we need of internal time for the internal technician? And what it's going to do is it now says 1.5 hours. Obviously, if we're outsourcing, we shouldn't need to spend 1.5 hours. It should be something less than that. So this is where it's just kind of important to know that the model is at least sophisticated enough where it will price this up, including some estimate for the internal time that you are going to have to expend for any escalations or on-site service work or things that the outsource cannot do. And it does it for you. I'm going to assume that we're going to do Continuum here. I'm going to change this back to Continuum NOC. I'm going to put the servers back to 3 just so I could show you. I just did 1 so I could show you what happens. So now I got 3 servers under Continuum. It's estimating 1.5 hours, which is 30 minutes per server under an outsource service. NOC services for networks, we typically will include this in the pricing if we do that, and that'll give us the 2 devices, which is routers and firewalls. A lot of folks, we typically don't charge for the network, and we probably should. Or what we'll do is sometimes we'll say, oh, if it's up to 10 users, I charge $50. If it's over this many, we charge $100. You can actually have an incorporated management monitoring of those devices, or at least have some time built in for the hours for those, whether you're managing it yourself or you're adding it to the monitored devices at Continuum, which does carry a hard cost. We've gotten through the servers. We've gotten through a couple of network devices. Now we are on the help desk. 20 PCs. Let's say I use US Voice 8x5, which is business hours. I want the US-based help desk, and I'm going to use just the 8x5 for now to keep the cost low for the end user. Now that's becoming less common, by the way, just because with COVID and everybody working from home, people are working crazy hours. We're finding like a little bit more of a drive to do 24/7 help desk availability with our quotes. Just a little side note that one of the effects of COVID is accelerating the drive towards that. But in this case, I'm going to use the 8x5, and you can see that it calculates the cost. It's going to be this cost. What does it include? It includes at least 10 minutes per PC per month, because even though we're paying Continuum, that cost of the 10 minutes per PC is going to be built in here. What's happening here now? I had 1.5 hours for the servers. Now when I add the help desk, I'm going to have almost 5 hours included in the pricing just for escalations and other issues that can't be solved by the help desk. So I'm going to be paid for that time because I know it's more than likely I'm going to have some percentage of calls come back to me. So we got to build that in. What happens if we are using our own internal folks and we're doing just internal? It's going to be a lot more. We're going to have coming up on almost 12 hours of pricing, and it should come up to probably at the end around 14 or 15. So we'll typically spend a lot more work if we're not outsourcing. So we'll have to have the time and the technicians availability to support those desktops, obviously, and it's all going to be done internally. I'm going to go back to the US Voice. Now that we're here, I haven't added any extra security. I've not added that BCDR. I've not added any WatchGuard or hardware as a service type of offering. This is just basically for a couple things. It's for the server, full service server management, desktop management, and believe it is also including Office 365. So we have not added anything else yet. This is just the baseline cost of where we ended up. And if I'm not mistaken, we should be in the right place. It's coming out to $92.
Tim, I think you accidentally clicked after hours and not business hours up there with the desktops.
Oh, maybe that's it. It should be a little higher. Ah, you're right. Thank you. Eagle eyes. We're in the right ballpark here. We're including Office 365 and basic full-service MSP of the servers and the desktops. And remember, we said it was about $105 to $110 a unit. We're almost there. It's about $103. We're in that ballpark of where we said we should be if we want to make 20% to the bottom line. This pricing, if you pay all your suppliers and you pay your employees and the pricing's around what in terms of the cost of those employees is about what we've estimated, then you will make 50% gross margins. And it even shows you here the total recurring cost, including outsource in pink here, and the total recurring profit. It'll show you kind of what your margins are. So the total cost to the end user is $2,055, and your hard cost for your employees, burdened for the whole ops department, and the cost to pay for all these outsourced services is going to be $1,027. And guess what? You're showing up right exactly at 50% gross margins, which is where you need to be. These numbers play out, and the calculator is supporting exactly what we discussed in the class the last 2 days. I'm going to go back up. We're going to add a couple more items on here. We're typically going to have these items in red are the ones that Lane definitely recommends we include in the typical offering. Obviously, dark web monitoring, yeah, we're probably going to need that. The endpoint detection and response, there's a couple of products here. We have Fortify for Endpoint. We have a Solutions Granted product. Panda Adaptive Defense, obviously, is another one. Whatever you use, you can even add your own if you don't use one of these in that other services box. But let's say we're using, let's use the Solutions Granted product. The WebRoot DNS, this is handled if you have a WatchGuard in place, but if you don't, we would probably want to include that in pricing. And then this other one, we'll do that, the SAT. Adding these items here is obviously going to add cost because you're providing additional services, and everything that's listed on here does carry a hard cost. I don't think I'm going to get into the BCDR configuration. I think you guys can kind of look at that, but whatever we adding to this for the BCDR solution would be on top. The partner services here, when we calculated with what we had up here, it's going to add 5 hours of labor based on what we have here, which is the various network devices, the Continuum Help Desk, Continuum NOC. We're still going to have to build in 5 hours. So it's already done that for you. However, if you want to add any hours, you can certainly do that. If for any reason you want to add any on-site hours on a regular basis that you need to include in the pricing, you can do that. And it's also going to add a quarterly 1 hour, so we have the customer business review or the quarterly business review, the QBR. It's going to add 1 hour per month, so you have 3 hours a quarter to configure any reports and meet with a customer and do that QBR. Now we've got inclusion of the time we're going to spend, even in the QBR, is not free time. It's included. We have covered that in our cost. I'm going to keep scrolling down here. Remember how I said I had Datto, the partner services. This is for anything that we sell to the customer that's not already included. You can add anything you want with any price and any margin. I had Datto here, and what will happen is the drop-down will have the various options that you configure. So you can have the small, medium, or large option for the BCDR. Whatever you put in here is what it'll show up. It'll pop out your pricing. This is that place where I talked about where we add any other services that we don't already have pricing for, you can add in here. And you can adjust the margin on it. You can set whatever price you want. So it's completely customizable. SD-WAN, we'll skip that. WatchGuard, if you wanted to include a WatchGuard firewall, all that pricing is in here. You can include the access points, the firewall. If you're doing it on that monthly program that runs through TAG, where it's just a month-to-month cost, it'll incorporate all of that into this quote. And then there's also the WatchGuard license-based products like Passport, which is a bundle of protection. They have MFA, multi-factor authentication, as a separate item, and then DNS Watch. So they have multiple bundles with pricing that you can all put in here. The Azure pricing, this is something that you can configure, and this is where you'd put it in. And there's one more thing. There's a little bit of margin we can add. If I go to partner services, or no, costing sheet. If you see this here, some members have taken to doing this where it says on line 22, Microsoft Office 365 management fee. What they're doing is they're setting a cost of $250, so it adds $5 to the Office 365 cost, which you can select this or not. But essentially what this does is this gives you a way to charge a little bit more for the Office 365 and the management of it. So just something to point out that that's available. If you want to build a little bit of Office 365 management fee in there, you can do that. And if you selected it, it would show up right here on the line 67. Now, we haven't added BCDR. We might have other things in here. But with what we ended up just now, adding all those additional services that we did include, this is the quote that would put out $2,300. It's about $118 per end user. And based on what's input now, that would be the quote to the customer. What you have here is the ability to take this and put it up against how you would normally price up a deal and see if it's close. If it's not, if you come up with a price that says $1,900 for this exact same products, well, I would say let's stop right there and let's figure out what's different. What are you pricing differently from the way we've come up with our pricing for what product? Are we underpricing something? Are we not including something? Like if you guys didn't include hours, you just basically doubled your outsource costs and didn't include the additional cost for the escalations that might come back if you're outsourcing everything, then that's an easy way for you to be off. It's good to use this to double check your own methodology, and if you come to the same place, then you validated that your pricing aligns with what we would recommend charging. Let me stop there. Any questions? This is a ton of information, I understand, but I appreciate your patience listening through it. Let's talk about pricing a little bit. Any comments, questions?
I got one. So,
okay, Vince.
Should we be figuring this out per deal, or once we kind of figure this out, can we just input this into ConnectWise and go with it?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I mentioned at the beginning was that we do have folks that basically will mock this up and identify pricing that they want to charge, and they'll make that their standard pricing, and then they can put it into ConnectWise. You can put it into QuoteWorks or Closel. Any quoting tool you use, you can use this to figure out what you want your pricing to be and then put that into your quoting tool.
Okay, thanks.
You absolutely, people are using it different ways. Some people are using it to quote every deal. Others are just using it to double check their own methodology to make sure, hey, from time to time, does our quoting methodology, how we arrive at a price, does it align with what TAG recommends? And as long as it's close, you're probably fine. So you can use it to produce a quote, you can use it to set your pricing, or you can use it to just periodically validate your own quotes to make sure they're aligning at least within some reasonable margin of error.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. This calculator came up, we kind of developed it 3 or 4 years ago. Lane came in and really did a good job kind of cleaning it up and making it a little easier to use. Once you get in and you do a few, it's really, really easy. Highly recommend. If nothing else, take it, use it, just price up. Take your last 2 proposals and put those proposals that you put in front of a customer through this model and see if it aligns with what you've been quoting in the field. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Let's figure out where and why and how and have a conversation. It's a good way just to even double check what you've been doing, because the 2 reasons why people don't make money in MSP, very simple. It's not easy to fix or easy to change necessarily sometimes, but it's we have too many people or we are underpricing our bundle. If we're not charging enough, we're not going to make 20% gross margins. We're not going to make 20% net profit. It'll all start because, hey, guess what? When we pay our employees and we pay our outsource costs, we've only got 30% left. And after that 30%, I still have to pay overhead and sales costs, so I might be breaking even if I'm not hitting those gross margins. So if I underprice my bundle, that's probably number 1. The second biggest reason why we don't make money is if we don't accurately manage the number of people we need to support the amount of business we have. And if we're overstaffed, then that's the second most common reason. So it's price and it's people. If we get those right, we're in good shape. If we get either one of those wrong, or it's a little bit of a combination of both, where we have, okay, we're a little bit underpriced and a little bit overstaffed, well, then obviously that's going to affect our profitability on our offering. This will help us at least get the pricing issue out. And a lot of folks that are on this call have come into TAG in the last year or 2 and probably have made some changes to their pricing since talking to me or talking to Lane, or they figured out that, hey, our pricing is good, or gosh, you know what, we were underpricing. Now that we're looking at it with TAG, we need to increase our pricing. What do we do with all the old customers that are under the old pricing? We may be able to fix it going forward, but how do we handle the folks that have been our customer for 2 years, 3 years, that are at potentially a vastly underpriced MSP bundle? How do we deal with that? Any ideas?
Ask them nicely to pay us more.
What's that?
Ask them nicely to pay us more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, really the answer is, you know what, that's not an easy conversation, so how do we deal with it? Well, we deal with it carefully. We don't want to lose the customer, obviously. But the first thing first is if your pricing is not accurate, let's stop the bleeding. Starting today, we're going to price it this way, and that way we know that everything from January 21st forward, we're pricing it properly now. And then you can chip away at the older legacy customers and try to, over the course of time, kind of bring them up into reality and what it's going to cost. You're not going to run and charge somebody 25% more. Obviously, that's not going to set well, but hopefully what you do is stop the bleeding. Let's price it right properly now, and then hopefully the legacy customers that are underpriced, through some periodic rate increases, or when they potentially add services, we can maybe add a little more to make up the gap than what they're adding. Those things, when things change, or annual price increases, we definitely want to have the ability to increase pricing from time to time. Unless we have a long-term contract that fixes their pricing, we typically are going to look at their pricing every year. So you want to be aggressive but not overbearing in raising those prices, because you want to keep the customer, but you need to have a path. You need to have a roadmap for getting them from point A to point B. Maybe it takes a couple of years of some periodic price increases, little tweaks here and there to get them where they need to be, but you need to have a plan to address those over time and ideally narrow that gap. If you got a customer that should be charged $110 a seat and you're charging them $90, okay, it's not the end of the world, but hopefully over the next few years you get them at least into the hundreds and they're a little bit closer to where they should be. It's a real good question. The inaction is not what we want. Let's fix the problem if we have a problem, pricing. Let's fix it. Let's price everything going forward the right way, and then over time, we'll deal with any of the legacy customers that have been under a different assumption. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, any last minute questions? Any other thoughts? Does this seem like a helpful tool?
Yes, very helpful.
Very much so, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah,
Tim,
definitely.
it's been great.
Yeah, thank you for going through this.
So take it, download it, play with it. Easy way, just take a last couple of proposals, run it through this, see if it comes out about the same. If you have any questions, obviously, reach out. Email, phone, anytime. I'm happy to go through a specific example with you on this. Anytime, just reach out, and I'm happy to always do that. So once you play with it a few times, I think you'll get the gist of what it's doing, and I think it's definitely going to be helpful to make sure that you stay on track with the most important thing in MSP is not to underprice.
Thank you again, Tim. Have a good one.
Thanks, Tim.
Hey, have a wonderful Friday, wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Tim.
Bye, everyone.
All right, guys.